Now, when I originally was talking to you, I told you we had 9 weeks to cover kind of 10 commandments. So you're probably thinking, oh, is he going to drop one? Is there one he's going to pick that he thinks really not important? I was really afraid of doing that because I don't want God to get me at some point because I chose a commandment not to do. So here's the deal. I'm taking the third commandment, which was the one we're supposed to do today, and I'm going to move it to the ninth commandment. So in a couple of weeks, you'll see me tie the third commandment and the ninth commandment together because I think they fit really well. And so today, if you were keeping up, if you were kind of tracking with us at home, we're going to cover the fourth commandment. So you didn't miss one. If you're looking around going, man, I've been here 3 weeks, but we're on the fourth commandment. What happened? I need to change my medication. No, you've gotten them all. We're just kind of moving to the fourth one today, which is one that I really enjoy. I think it's one that reflects God's heart for us really well. If there's something that shows God's love, it's this commandment right here, which simply says this: keep the Sabbath holy. That's the fourth commandment. We're gonna take this morning to unpack what that means, keeping the Sabbath holy. Now, don't let the word holy throw you off. Holy is one of those words that simply mean unique or special or set apart, different. And Sabbath simply means to cease from work and to rest. So a good way to say this commandment is this: keep the Sabbath unique from all the other days by setting apart and resting. And so this morning what I'm going to do is kind of walk with you through what resting looks like. Because we all have different ideas of what resting is. We've got thoughts, and this is what it means to rest, whether I'm sitting in my PJs all day long, that's resting, or something else. So what is God's heart for us about the Sabbath? Obviously, it's something significant because God takes 4 words to tell us not to kill each other. Thou shalt not kill. And he just kind of lays it out there. But the Sabbath, he takes about 94 words to unpack this commandment to us. You ever thought about that? That God takes 94 words. I mean, can you imagine? The 10 commandments were pretty short, and then he drops down, the fourth commandment, and Moses is going, I can't carry a rock that big. And all these words that God used to tell us that he wants us as his people to rest. So in God's economy, in God's eyes, in his heart, it is a really big deal. It's one of those commandments I think that even transcends the 10 commandments. The idea of rest was already kind of built into God's word. It was already kind of built in to life itself. If you go all the way back to the beginning, Genesis. So remember your Genesis and what's going on in Genesis. God's creating the first day, spinning some things out. Second day, third day, fourth day, all the way up to the sixth day. And at the end of sixth day, after God had created everything, on the seventh day, what did he do? Yeah, he rested. And so let me read that to you real quick just to give you an idea. This is Genesis chapter 2, verse 1 and 2. Let me just tell you what happened. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. So the project was done. And by the seventh day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all of his work. And then God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy. He made it unique. He made it different, set apart from all the other days. Because on it, he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now, was God just tired? I mean, had it been such a long day? You've been doing planets, you've been doing solar systems. All right, that took a little out of me. And then you're doing animals and kind of putting them all together, the creativity to make a giraffe and a hippopotamus. I mean, okay, that's exhausting. And he gets to the sixth day, and he's created man, and that was pretty good. And he creates woman, who's incredibly complicated, and that just wore God out. I mean, what happened at the end of this moment that's going on with God? Is he just tired and he just needs a break? No. God of the universe isn't tired. The God that just spoke light into existence isn't exhausted. I mean, how tired do you get flipping the switch? Click. Not very. For God, this was nothing. God doesn't get to the seventh day and go, I'm exhausted. No. What God is doing for us, even from the beginning, before the 10 Commandments, he's modeling for us this pattern of a 7-day rhythm to life. Think about it. A 7-day rhythm. We're working for 6 days, kind of giving her all, and on that 7th day we rest. We have this idea of this 7-day rhythm of life. Now, you might not have ever thought how important it was that we live in a 7-day rhythm. You just do it. You know what? I've been in school, and Monday through Friday I go to school. Saturday I get to hang out. Sunday's church. And you do work. You know what? I work Monday through Friday sometimes, and Saturday's the honeydew, and then Sunday church. And so you just think about, that's just what we do. But do you realize that cultures have fought against a 7-day rhythm and have failed? You look at the early Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, they all thought, you know what we're going to do, we're going to create a 10-day work week. We're going to do this thing in 10 days. We need a few extra days. We get that 7-day thing that those Hebrews did, but we're going to try a 10-day week. And it failed. They couldn't do it. The human body just could not get into the gear and the rhythm of a 10-day week. The Romans, who are crazy workaholics, who said, I can't get enough done in 7 days. I need another day. You ever been there? I need another day. So they decided 7 wasn't enough. So they tried to create an 8-day week. You know what happened to it? It failed. It doesn't exist anymore. They tried it for about a year and it just crashed and burned. They couldn't get their people to orient their life around an 8-day work week. Even the French Enlightenment. I don't know if you ever really read about that and what goes on in the French Enlightenment when the industrial age was hitting and man's reason was, at the top. We could think our way out of anything. Man's reason was supreme. They looked around and said, you know what, 7 days, that's the thing the church does. Let's create a 10-day work week. And let's get back to those Greeks and Egyptians and do this thing in 10 days. And it didn't last very long at all. Absolutely failed. So somehow, some way, in God's creation of us, He has built this 7-day rhythm of life. The 7-day rhythm of work where we're doing things for 6 days, really working hard, but we need a day. And a 7-day period where we just cease, we stop, we practice Sabbath, and we rest. And it's interesting to see how God has built that in us from the beginning. And He did that now with these Hebrew people. So they're coming out of slavery, they're leaving Egypt, and God is in this moment reaffirming to the Hebrews this idea of a 7-day rhythm, this 7-day life. And it's important because these Hebrews were slaves. Their life cycle was 24/7. You were a slave and you didn't have like this nice little slave covenant that you signed, 5 days you're going to work, 6 days maybe if you're not a good slave, but we're going to give you a day off. You don't see that in slave culture. What these Hebrews did is they worked 24/7. They made bricks. Every day they'd get up, chink, 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 and they made bricks. And when they got home, they dreamed about bricks. When they got up the next morning, they made bricks again. And it was that way from the time they could carry and mold and shape to the time they died. The Egyptians just had them making bricks and building. And so you have this people who are used to this work all the time. I'm just a slave to the man mentality coming into the wilderness, and God is simply saying, I'm making you a new people. I'm making you a new creation. You are now mine, and I want to reestablish with you that life isn't all about working until you die. Life isn't about just getting as many bricks as possible into that home you're building, into the things you're doing. There's something greater than just working. And so He tells them, I want you to practice Sabbath. As important as it is that you don't kill, that you don't steal, that you don't put me first in your life, as important as those commandments are, I'm placing this one here to tell you that you need to practice rest. And it's something that He engenders. He kind of calls out to His people to do this. You're no longer slaves. Embrace life. Embrace this concept of rest. And so that brings us up to where we are in Exodus. This is the command that we're going to take a look at this morning. The fourth command in verse 8. This is Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. If you got your scriptures, go ahead and turn there with me, and you can kind of just hang out there. We're going to be a couple of different places, but this gives you the idea. The 10 Commandments, Exodus 20, verse 8 says this: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Let me just stop there, because I know this is a message on rest, but let me give a shout out to work here really quick. If you got your pen, just underline that. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Before we dive into rest, let me just tell you this right here, that God does value work. He values work. He values us diving in. We were designed to be functionally effective in this world. So as much as we get up on Monday morning and we hate it, oh my gosh, it's the grind. I got to go back to it. There's something that God designed in us to be engaged in work and doing, to be functionally, practically engaged in our world. God designed us that way, and it's a piece of what He calls us to have a functional purpose by working. Even in the Garden of Eden, you think about this, the place that was perfect. You have Adam and Eve in this garden. Everything is great around them. And God has given them something to do. He didn't just say, you know what, guys, here's your lazy boy and your little just your nightstand. You just watch the animals parade by. And they just do that all day long. God told them, He said, listen, here's your job. You're in Eden. Everything is perfect. There's no sin in the world. And they still have work to do. I know sometimes we think sin and work are the same thing. But He says, you still have work to do. I want you to be stewards of this. I want you to caretake the garden. I want you to go out and make sure the lion and the lamb are getting along. There's some inherent things that are going to happen there later on. Make sure they're okay right now. Make sure you're engaged with creation. Take care of the garden. And so Adam and Eve had this work to do. In the evening, they would stop from their work, and God would show up, and they would hang out. And on the seventh day, they would rest because that's what God modeled. Even in our concept of heaven, I know a lot of times when we think about heaven, the artist's portrayal is us sitting on clouds with our little harps. That's the telephone. Kyle, give me a harp. What is it? Anyway, you're playing an instrument, and you're just sitting on a cloud, and you're just chilling out, and that's all you do. From being young in church, I've heard that over and over. You know, that heaven is just the ultimate vacation. You're just sitting around doing nothing. Oh my gosh, that does not sound like heaven to me. That sounds like another place. You're just sitting, just playing a harp, just looking around. No, when you read Revelation, you realize that even in heaven, even in a place of perfection where we are finally complete in who we are, God has given us things to do. We're going to be reigning and ruling and overseeing in this new world that He has created. Work, doing things, being functionally effective in the world around us is a huge part of God's design and plan for our life. So if you're working and you're really struggling, I just need about $6 million. If I just had $6 million, I think I can live life right. Understand this, that God has designed you for work. If you win the lottery tomorrow, make sure you tithe. If you win the lottery tomorrow and you're there and your dream is, my tithes in Hawaii for the rest of my life, you're missing the point. I will guarantee you that if you do that, at some point you are just going to not feel right about life. Because you were designed for purpose. You were designed for a function. Do it for a couple of months and invite your friends and family. But at some point, get back to making a difference in the world. God values work. He values what we're going to do. And another implication is probably one that hits home to us a little more. The lottery thing, not so much. But this one, I think, is good for us to understand. And that's the concept of retirement. Now, let me unpack it before I have a revolt. Retirement, when you think of it from a biblical perspective, is this. It doesn't exist. I mean, Genesis to Revelations, you look it up in the concordance, retirement doesn't exist according to what you find in the Bible. Now, let's continue to unpack this with me. Think about it. I think it is absolutely incredible that we move toward financial freedom. That you work really, really hard and you have that day, that time when you can just simply say, listen, I've accomplished everything that I would like to do working for the man, and now I am financially free, and I can choose today what I do. I think it is incredible that we have that ability in our culture. God's picture of your life at that point, God's picture of your life at that point, when you get to the place when you can just be financially free of everything and you can choose, for the most part, along with what your wife says, about what you can do in a day, is this. It's not retirement. It's reassignment. In fact, get that word in your head. It's not retirement, it's reassignment. Letting God reassign you. You finally reach this place where you've got this financial freedom where you can choose what you do. And you've got all this experience. What I look out and see on our congregation is not folks that have punched the clock and now they get to just sit and relax. I see people who've got an amazing amount of experience. I see people who have an amazing amount to offer back to the kingdom and wisdom and what they know. And God sees that too. You've spent 40, 50, 60 years developing all this experience and finally being at the place where you can choose what to do. And I would dare say now God is really ready to use you. He can try to use us 20, 30, 40-year-olds, but we're hard-headed. We have a hard time just listening to just Him on a daily basis, much less the fact that you've got all this wisdom that God is calling you to use even in your retirement age or your reassignment age. So use that freedom to dive back in, to be reassigned by God. The kingdom needs you as teachers, as missionaries. I have a good friend in Seattle. He worked for Boeing. He was a real high-up guy in Boeing, and I love this fella. He was a hard driver. I mean, he worked hard his whole life, and then he retired. And I would see him on Sunday mornings. I'd come out of church, and he'd be in the back, and he'd have this three-seat little kid thing. He would go into the nursery, and he would take all the crying babies. There are usually at least 3 of them. And he'd take all the crying babies, and he would just push them around the church, and they would laugh, and da-da-da-da. And I was like, dude, you're a Boeing executive. You've made millions in your life. You have got all, you could be anywhere. It says, Jim, this is where I want to be. I have spent my life working with grumpy, complaining people. I can handle crying babies. And you see this guy who's got it. He understands it. He does other things. He teaches. He does all these different things in life. But he understands that at this point, this is the point when he can really make a difference, when he can really give back and engage. In our church, I tell you, we need mentors. We desperately need mentors. We've got young couples who are coming up who are asking the question, Jim, how do I do this thing called marriage? How do I do this thing called life? How do I do this thing called kids? I just want to get rid of them. What do I do? And you've been there, and you've done that. And now you have experience. I think the thing that culture tells us is when you retire, that you become less than what you are. And in God's economy, that is simply not true. When you get to the place where you're financially free and you can choose what to do, that's when God can really use you to pour back into the next generation. First Christian needs you. Needs you to be mentors, needs you to engage, needs you carrying crying babies because you know how to do that. Needs you loving us and engaging. So, reassignment, not retirement. God values work. Now, let's jump back into the rest part because the message isn't about work. The message is about rest. It simply says this, pick back up in verse 10. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but on the 7th day, that day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, nor your animals, nor the aliens within your gates. Those are strangers, not people from outer space. For in the 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that was in them, and He, God Himself, rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath, and He made it holy. So, what does it mean to keep the Sabbath? What does keeping the Sabbath look like? In its basic form, I'm going to give you a couple of things this morning. In its basic form, keeping the Sabbath simply means to cease working. And actually, that's what Sabbath means. It means to stop. It means to rest. It means to cease from work. And so what God is saying here, He says, listen, if you want to be my people, if you want to get it, if you want to grab hold of what it means to follow God, then you got to grab this principle of stopping, of resting, of having a day when you cease from working, when you take a rest. And I think that's huge for us. As big as it was for these Israelites who were coming out of slavery, who just knew this 24/7 lifestyle, just always making bricks, I think it's very relevant to us today. We are constantly finding ourselves in that brick-making mode. We're in brick-making overload. We're in change overload. We're in choice overload. I was in the grocery store a couple of days ago, and you know the cereal aisle. We don't call it the cereal aisle in my family. We call it the crying aisle, because when you go down it, those kids are screaming, I want the Fruity Loops, I want the Cocoa Pebbles. It's just, I hate that aisle. Well, don't hate it, just like it a lot. And so you go, and they put all the special cereal, within kids. They don't put the cereal up high where you can go, no, don't touch that. By the time we get to the end of the aisle, we've got got all this stuff in there. We were checking out last night, and we had bubbles. Someone had put bubbles in the basket. I was like, Jen, what's up? She said, I didn't do it. And it's like, okay. So they just put all this stuff down there where the kids are. And when you look at the cereal aisle, you know how many choices are on there? There are over 150 cereal choices on one aisle in the grocery store. 150. And it just amazes me. And that's just a cereal aisle in the grocery store. We have choices all around us. So there's choice overload. There's information overload. There's debt overload that we experience, especially in this economy. Problem overload, technology overload, possession overload. We have so many things and stuff that we just have. And of course, there's work overload. Hours and stress are up, and time with family and time with God is down. And God knows that about us. Even the world recognizes, have done study after study, and I can give you some references on some of these later. They've done study after study where they talk about how if you work a frantic pace and rarely stop, if you're the workaholic in the room, if you're the one that says, I'm always on, always driving, even when I'm home, checking the cell phone and doing the emails. It's okay to elbow people in here on Sundays. If you're that person, then what even culture will tell you is at some point you're going to experience burnout and exhaustion. You're going to come to the point when your productivity slips no matter how hard you work, and the systems just break down. Here's what I would add to that, what I've seen as a pastor. That when you get to that point, you tend to make poor choices. Poor choices not only in work, but also in life. The people that are in struggles in relationships that have made poor choices, you kind of peel that back and you realize a lot of those folks are folks that have just been working so hard that they're exhausted and they've not engaged with God and they're not engaged with their family and they're just stepping back going, ugh. And in that moment, they've made some really poor choices that have impacted their family and their life. You can disregard the Sabbath. Totally can. You can throw it out the window. But it's the one command where you definitely, for sure, will pay a price if you do that. This is something that God calls us to. He calls us to honor the Sabbath. And in God's wisdom and in God's grace, He commands us to take a day where we stop, where we cease from work, where we rest. And that is a good thing for us to know as people. As folks that tend to make a lot of bricks sometimes and live life just trying to go at a breakneck pace. Now, if I just told you that Sabbath was just about taking a break and stopping and ceasing, that would not be the complete picture. Because you would probably get this idea. Okay, so Jim, Sabbath is about me just sitting and doing nothing. The best Sabbath I can experience is me and my PJs and a lazy boy for a 24-hour period. Are you telling me that's what Sabbath is about? Because I can do that like all the time. I can Sabbath a lot. No, Sabbath is not just about sitting and doing nothing. When God gave us this concept of the Sabbath, He gave it to us in the context of the Old Testament, and He had different pictures for what He called us to do on the Sabbath. So a piece of the Sabbath is ceasing from work. That's a part of the command. But a significant part of Sabbath is doing some specific things on this day. So ceasing from work, but not necessarily ceasing from life and some other things. So here's some specific things that make this day holy and unique. The first is this. Before I do that, let me unpack a question. Some of you guys have this question. I've dialogued with you about it a little bit. So, Jim, Sabbath. Isn't that Saturday? You just read, 6 days we're supposed to work, and on the seventh day we're resting. That's like Saturday, isn't it? So what do? Are we supposed to practice Sabbath on Saturday, and yet here it is Sunday, and then I know some people that practice it, on other days of the week. When am I supposed to be doing this? Give me the right answer. I'm a rule follower. I need the right answer here. Done a ton of research. Here's what I can tell you. The original Sabbath, the way God set it up, the way the Jews and the Hebrews followed it, yes, it was on Saturday. Even now, you go to a synagogue, the Hebrew place, and you go on Sunday, there's not going to be anybody there because they did all their stuff on Saturday. There's even some Christians who worship on Saturday. They pick Saturday as their Sabbath, and that's the way it originally was. Now, when Christianity started kicking off and getting going in Acts, when folks came to know Christ, if you read the book of Acts, you realize that they engaged with God every day of the week. So you had Sabbath that the Jews practiced, and then all of a sudden people started coming to know Christ, and boom, every day, we just overdid it. Every day we wanted to engage and do church and have fellowship and do special things together. So in the book of Acts, you see them meeting every day. They couldn't sustain that. They had jobs. They had things that they were supposed to do. So if you were a Jewish Christian, you still worshiped on Saturday. You did Sabbath. You went to the synagogue, because all those Old Testament pieces and those Old Testament things you did, they pointed to Christ. And it was a great way to go, man, I hear you talking, and let me talk about how that Old Testament thing points to Christ. And so if you were a Jewish Christian, Saturday was still a big deal. You probably celebrated on Sunday too, because the Gentile Christians, all the rest of us who didn't grow up with Jewish heritages, who didn't have all those backgrounds, we were looking around going, I got nothing. What day matters? Well, Jesus rose on the first day of the week. And so you have the Gentile Christians picking Sunday as their day. And as the church began to be more Gentile and less Jewish by the first century, basically what you have is a church that's worshiping on Sunday and picking that day. And Paul just kind of sums it up for us here in Romans. Romans chapter 5, he says this, addressing some of these. Actually, this is chapter 14, verse 5. Paul says this, one man considers one day more sacred than others. Another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. He who regards one day as special does so as to the Lord. So what Paul is simply saying this, he's saying simply, don't obsess over what day. Whatever day you choose to pick to practice Sabbath, that's an okay day. Just be convinced in your own mind. So those brothers and sisters in Christ that practice on Saturday, I go, woohoo, awesome, good stuff. That's a great day. Those that practice on Sunday, perfect. That's good, because then I can hang out with you and we can do Sabbath together and we can journey. And so it's not the day that matters as much as the principle. And even for me, honestly, Sunday is a work day. I love to say that I just would come up here and just do this just willy-nilly anytime, but I'm exhausted. I'm tired by the end of this day. And I go home and I rest. You know my Sabbath? It's Friday. That's when I hang out with my family. That's when I chill out. That's when I cease working for the most part, and I do some of these other components that Sabbath is about. And I'm glad of that. So he says, whatever day you pick and choose, just make sure you are honoring the Sabbath and keeping it holy. So what does that mean then? If it's not just ceasing to work, what are the things that make Sabbath holy for me? There's another piece to this. It's simply this, taking time to remember and reflect. A piece of Sabbath is stopping to work, but also taking time to remember and reflect. You see God practicing this in creation. He's creating for 6 days. Boom, 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 boom. And at the end of the sixth day, the beginning of the seventh day, you see God stepping back and in Genesis chapter 1, looking around and going, wow. And this stuff that I've created, these people, these things, this is really, really good. You see God taking a moment to simply evaluate and savor and reflect His own handiwork. And that is a huge component of Sabbath. And actually Deuteronomy chapter 5, if you're wondering about Deuteronomy, it's a lot of rehash of Exodus. And so you have Moses talking about the 10 commandments again, kind of unpacking them more. Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 15 says this, reopening this other commandment. It starts in verse 12, but this is what he says about the Sabbath. Verse 12, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And jump down to verse 15, it says this, remember on the Sabbath, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath. So God reinforces on the Sabbath this idea of remembering and reflecting. Life is not just about thinking about the next appointment, the next person, the next time you're connecting, the next event, the next play date. It's not just about the next thing. God says on Sabbath, I want you to stop and reflect and remember. Don't just sit in the lazy boy all day. Take time to stop and reflect and remember what I've done for you, how I've worked in your life, who I am. You ever just do that on Sabbath? Just say, God, who are you? and think about who he is, what he's done in our life, how we've encountered him. The reason we worship on Sabbath is so that we can take time as a group of people and do this together. We can think about God together. You can hear it sung about. You can hear someone talk about who God is. This is a piece of Sabbath. So when you're thinking about how do I practice this, how do I honor this command, it's ceasing from work, but it's also remembering who God is and what he's about. Sabbath is not about just checking out. It's also about engaging and remembering and reflecting on God. And I'll give you one more thing before we wrap up about Sabbath, because this is kind of a fun one. Sabbath is stopping from working, taking time to reflect and remember, but also adding recreation that refreshes. This might be a little bit different for you because so often we think about Sabbath being, bored for the Lord. I grew up with that kind of concept. Jim, you didn't do anything on Sabbath. You didn't play basketball. You didn't go out and hang out. You were just home. And I remember, wow, Jesus is not fun. And it just killed me. I did not look forward to Sunday. Just didn't look forward to Sunday at all because I knew it was just going to be a day of just, man, the preacher guy, and then just sitting. And that's not what God calls us to, especially on Sabbath. It's not about being bored for the Lord. The Sabbath is a culmination of life. A part of Sabbath is enjoying life in a way that refreshes you. Sabbath was designed to refresh us. And so first thing that God says is simply this: cease from working. Put down the phone. Don't check the emails. Don't be thinking about work for a whole day. Remember me, engage in worship, have a good time celebrating who I am, but also I want you to do some things that refresh your soul and that refresh your life. And so I love this component of the Sabbath. In fact, it might surprise some of us that God is the one that created fun. Taste buds were God's idea. He was the one that said, you know what? I've got something that's going to surprise him. The first time that kid eats a lemon, it's just going to be good stuff. And he created us to have these senses in our world around us, the touch, the sights, the sounds. He said, listen, I want you to enjoy this world that I've created. And I want you to engage in it. You look at the Hebrew holidays. This is so unique to look at. You think about rules and regulations when you think about the Old Testament. But when you see these Hebrew holidays, they were multi-day parties. Festivals, because that's the Christian word we can say. They were multi-day festivals. When these guys got together and they ate and they had a good time and they celebrated who God is, and God says, this is what I want you to do to worship me. I want you to gather together and I want you to celebrate life. And he gave these things to the Hebrews, and they did. When they got together, they enjoyed life. They enjoyed their Creator. They enjoyed God, and it refreshed their souls. The very first miracle, here's one that'll turn you sideways. The very first miracle, you guys, you've heard of this one. It was the wedding party. They were all hanging out and they were having a good time and they run out of beverage. And so Mary's like, this thing's about to turn, this is going to get bad. I don't know if she was connected. I don't know if she was in charge of food. I don't know. But she goes to Jesus and says, Jesus, can you do something here? We know you're God. Can you use your amazing ability to keep the party going? And you know what Jesus says? Sure thing. I can do that. And you can come up with all kind of theological ideas of why he turned water into wine on that first miracle. And they're probably good. But the simplest point is, Jesus was about those folks continuing to experience celebration and life. He didn't want that groom to turn to his bride and go, I didn't plan. I had one job to do. I did not plan it well. He did not want that. He wanted these guys to continue experiencing life, and it's just a part of who he is. Recreation that refreshes. Now, can recreation be misused? For sure, no doubt. God doesn't call us to the kind of enjoyment that produces regret, guilt. I wish I hadn't done that. There are a lot of things that are classified as great fun to do, and you walk away from that going, oh my gosh, I should never have done that. And you have guilt and you have regret. That's not what God calls us to. What God calls us to is recreation that refreshes, that brings life. And Jesus says it this way, I came to give you what? Life. Not more rules, not more regulations, not sitting and just pondering, being bored and just going, oh, I guess we're going to be this way until we die, and then there's those harps in heaven. That's not what he's created us for. He's created us for life and life more abundant. A part of our Sabbath should be disengaging from work. Absolutely. You should just disengage from the work that God has given you to do. You should take moments and times where you reflect and remember on who he is. Don't forsake the gathering of yourselves together. Don't just say, my Sabbath is on the lake somewhere and that's where I can do Sabbath the best. No, don't forsake this. Worship and engage. But also a piece of your Sabbath should be doing life that refreshes and that refreshes your soul. For my family, what we do on Sabbath is we take hikes. We are always trying to discover some place to go. We go hiking. We do dinners. Sometimes we'll even try to go to Chuck E. Cheese, which we call Snotty Sneeze because our kids they get something when they go there. So I'm sorry if you guys are going there today. I just hosted for half of you. So we do something that's fun because honestly, at the end of the day, you know what I don't want? I don't want preacher kids. I don't want to have those kids that look at God and look at church and look at Sunday as the worst day of the week. Oh, that was the day that Dad worked and he came home grumpy because he was dealing with people. And I don't want them to see that. And so what we've done in our life is simply taught them that Sabbath is rest. That Sabbath is refreshing. That Sunday as much is about fun as it is about God. And we've tried to marry those two things together in a very beautiful way that our kids are stoked about Sunday. They love it. They're bouncing off the walls. They're ready to engage. So my encouragement to you is simply this: engage in Sabbath. Jesus summed it up in the best way possible. He simply said this: Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Sabbath is not our taskmaster. Sabbath is not something that says you can only do this and that's it. You just don't get out of this box. God made Sabbath for us where we can stop from the work we're doing. We can go, you know what? Today, the bricks don't matter. Seriously, the bricks don't matter. God, you matter. And I'm going to reflect on who you are and what you've done in my life. And then I'm going to embrace this life that you've given me. I'm going to do the things that bring life to my family, life to who I am. Sabbath is about our renewal, both physically, both spiritually, and emotionally. So, let me ask you this. Do you practice Sabbath? I know you come to church because you're here, but do you practice Sabbath? Do you leave here and you go right back to work? Do you take time to stop and disengage? And not just a few hours, not, you know what, I'm home, I'm having dinner with my family. Do you take time to stop and cease from work? Step away from the rat race. Quit making bricks and rest your heart and your life. Do you take time to do that? Do you take time to reflect and remember who God is? Is this just a rule to you, a regulation we're supposed to go to church? Or do you actually stop and go, God, you are real and you're alive and you're life-changing? And do you take time to just have fun, to engage with your family and to simply say, you know what? God is about life, and you teach your kids, you model for your spouse, you model for those around you that God brings life. And you engage in that. Do you really, truly practice Sabbath? God is so serious about this day that he put it right smack in the middle of the 10 commandments. And he said, if you want to be my people, don't steal, don't kill, put me first. Take a break. Rest. Practice Sabbath. It's a huge thing for us to do. And it's a good challenge, I think, for all of us. So I'm going to just pray and ask God to take this truth and seal it to our hearts about what Sabbath is and means to us. Let's pray. Father, I love you. I love that you care about me so much that you have said, Jim, take a break. Take a day when you're not thinking about work and appointments and counseling and the weight of ministry, and just think about you. You've given me that. Here's my confession to you, Father. I don't always do it. Carry that phone with me too much. I know that I'm engaged in work too much at times, and I don't give my family everything that it needs. And so this morning, Father, I just simply confess that I haven't honored Sabbath. I've broken this commandment in a way that's not healthy for me. And so God, thank you for the reminder Thank you for the reminder just to cease working. You love us so very much that you've given us this command. And so, Holy Spirit, I just pray your work on people's hearts right now. And the folks that there are workaholics in the room, that you'll challenge them right now to stop making bricks, living life under the slavery of work, that you give them the ability to rest and relax with family. For those that are in retirement that have just kind of sat and wondered if they have purpose, God, that you reinvigorate their heart toward reassignment, and you give them the ability to step back in and engage. And for those of us that have just forgotten what it means to have fun in God, that you refresh our soul as we do this thing you call life, as we go all in with you, Father, that we experience life and life to the fullest. God, you do that amazing work in our heart and our life. Speak to us today. Let us worship you and remember who you are, because this today is our Sabbath. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen.